Rudy's revelation.
Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast this morning. Welcome. All right, so Donald Trump is going to war, economic war, trade war with China. All the other countries are coming to the table. Trump is using the leverage of the U.S. market for goods, and China is fighting back. Not surprising. All right, so let's get into news for today, April 8th, Tuesday. Rudy's revelation. All right, so today we're going to start out with what is on everybody's mind, which is the trade war that Trump started. Trump shot across the bow, particularly of China, but also of the European Union. And we're really not sure what the European Union is going to do. Are they going to side with the U.S. or are they going to side with China? All right, we're going to start out with the Federalist. Tariffs aren't bad for the economy, just for financial pencil pushers. Now, what I wanted to do here, I'll just go into the story and then I'm going to recite some statistics. The howls of from Wall Street echo like a cries of spoiled aristocracy waking up to find their servants gone, a modest dip in the stock market. Well, I don't know if it was modest. And suddenly the talking heads on CNBC and Bloomberg are shrieking about doom, devastation, and economic collapse. There are the same people who insisted that market plunges during the Biden administration were just statistical noise. Just a couple of statistics. Now, although 65% of U.S. adults are invested in the stock market, the majority of wealth in the stock market, 50%, is owned by just 1% of investors. So the majority of investors, 80%, own less than 1% of the stock market's wealth. So you have to put that, it puts it all into context, because when you're talking about a stock market collapse, it damages corporate industry and rich individuals for the most part. Does it affect your 401k? If you're not retiring this year, like right now, it might be problematic, but people can defer. And so they could push it off for 6 months, another year or so, and the stock market will rebound. The story goes on to say the populist manifest, Trump is delivering on a promise of long overdue correction to an economic system that has gleefully sold out the American working class. For decades, jobs were outsourced, factories were shuttered, and the keys to our industrial future were handed to our geopolitical rivals, most specifically China. All right, what's the Wall Street Journal saying this morning? Trump turns screws on China, leaves door opens for deals with other countries. Administration sent conflicting messages, but the president rules out a broad pause. So, as I said several days ago, this is the way it's shaping up. The reality about what's happening with China and the tariff war is that it is focused on our relationship with China, specifically our trade relationship But overall, China is an adversary. And as the Federalist just pointed out, why we would hand the keys to our industrial future to our geopolitical rivals remains a good question. So the Daily Mail chimes in and says, China says it will never accept U.S. blackmail and escalated tariff threats. Now, if you didn't know, China is our ideological and geopolitical rival, trade rival, etc. Why we built them into this, because it was really American consumer dollars that drove the military buildup, the economic buildup that built the communist Chinese, which we were railing against communism for decades. Why we would empower an Asian communist country with American consumer dollars. It built into another Cold War, so it leads credence to the assertion that we built the Soviet Union we built up communism as a foil against the liberty-minded, free economic style of the United States. One American News has the headline, Trump warns of additional 50% tariff if China maintains retaliatory measures. He said in a post on Truth Social yesterday, China issued retaliatory tariffs of 34% on top of their already record-setting tariffs. Non-monetary tariffs, illegal subsidization of companies, and massive long-term currency manipulation. Despite my warning, he said, that any country that retaliates against the U.S. will be retaliated against as well. Reuters. The U.S. calls China escalation a big mistake as tariff war rages. China's fast and hardline approach contrasted with more emollient moves by other Asian countries. European Union is also still consulting with member states on how hard to punch back against Trump's tariffs without causing more harm to its consumers and exporters. So this is what we're looking at here. Will the European Union retaliate and join China in a trade war against the United States? Or will China become further isolated by going it alone in a trade war against the United States, which holds all the cards? They hold no cards. The only thing we have to worry about is the soybean market and some wheat and other agricultural goods that the U.S. farmers ship to China. Also pork manufacturers, etc. The Reuters story goes on to say European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, in a phone call with China's Premier Li Qiang, called on Beijing to ensure a negotiated solution and stressed the need to support a fair trading system founded on a level playing field. The two also discussed setting up a mechanism to track possible trade diversion caused by the tariffs. The EU fears China will redirect cheap imports from U.S. to Europe, and Europe doesn't want it. So this is the quandary that the EU and von der Leyen face, is do we plow ahead with the New World Order and side with China? Or do we side with our traditional ally, the United States? There's going to be some hand-wringing and fence-sitting for the near future, but I think they're going to come down on the side of the United States. Why? Is because the American consumer market is the strongest in the world and it's fairly open. And Trump said it could remain open, but you have to open your markets. You can't close your markets because this is what it is with China. China has a completely closed economic system. Their markets are closed for all intents and purpose, but ours are open. That's the point. So China doesn't want to open their market, so they won't have access to U.S. markets. They never should have been allowed into the WTO, and they should be removed from the WTO because of what Trump said in his Truth Social post. They don't play fair. They manipulate their currency, they subsidize industry, they close their markets, they have tariffs, all these other things. However, there is some upside. Appears to be. Zero Hedge's reporting risk reward is skewed to the upside. Goldman traders turn bullish. Post-millennial, Trump says negotiations with nations over tariffs will begin immediately. Negotiations with other countries, which also have requested meetings, will take place immediately, he said. The story goes on to say, on Monday, President Donald Trump, as he threatened China to hike tariffs in response to the tariff increase of 34% on U.S. imports, that he would immediately be meeting with countries that have requested to have meetings surrounding trade negotiations. After threatening to raise tariffs on China by 50% if the country does not remove their 34% retaliation on U.S. goods, Trump said in a post on Truth Social, negotiations with other countries, which also requested meetings, will take place immediately. Thank you for your attention to this matter, so on and so forth. Because what he's doing is he's setting up a system to come to the table. Will the talks or meetings be fruitful? He's going to be hard-nosed with all the deals. But if you're not willing to come to the table, the tariffs are going to stay. You're going to be cut out of the American consumer market. As we heard from Lutnick yesterday, everybody wants in. We're the consumers of the world. Everybody wants into our market. So we hold all the cards. Just the News is reporting, art of the tariff deal, dozens of foreign powers negotiate for free trade instead of retaliation. The article goes on to say, preliminary announcements from Trump himself and senior administration fields, moreover, suggested that many key trading partners were prepared to negotiate favorable trade agreements to eliminate or at least reduce the tariffs. Countries from all over the world are talking to us. Tough but fair perimeters are being set. The spokes spoke to the Japanese Prime Minister this morning. He said in a post, Trump said in a post, he is sending a top team to negotiate. They have treated the U.S. very poorly on trade. They don't take our cars, but we take millions of theirs. Likewise, agriculture and many other things. It all has to change, but especially with China. And that's why the war, it is a trade war, but it's specifically with China. Everything else is just window dressing for the most part. I mean, there are going to be real tariffs, serious negotiations, etc. In the meantime, Trump urged Americans to avoid being a panicking and have patience with the market as it adjusted to the economic rebalancing. And then it goes on to say the National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett said during an interview with ABC, countries are angry and retaliating, by the way, coming to the table. He said that the tariffs imposed last week so far have spurred many countries to approach the administration and begin negotiations. I've got a report from the U.S. Trade Representative last night that more than 50 countries have reached out to the president for negotiations, Hassett said. More headlines. This is from the Post-Millennial. Canada lose 30,000 jobs in March as unemployment jumps to 6.7%. The wheels may be starting to fall off the Canadian labor market. Article goes on to say the impact of trade tariffs appears to be working its way through the economy, said James Orlando, senior economist at the Toronto Dominion Bank, said in a note to clients. According to the Financial Post, businesses and consumers are naturally hesitant in the face of heightened political uncertainty. It's going to have its effects to other nations more than the United States. Like I said, the best thing to do to prepare is if you're a consumer of foreign-made goods, buy them, stock up on them now. And then, as we work through this adjustment period, shop American. Try to figure out now what your U.S.-made alternatives could be. Or from Canada, from the Post-Millennial, Ontario court admits ban on COVID protests was unconstitutional. Then Ontario Prime Minister, MPP, Randy Hiller has been charged for organizing or attending protests against COVID restrictions in the spring of 2021, during a time when the province banned most outdoor gatherings. We know all the reaction to COVID was illegal and was part of an overwhelming plan that was put into place a long time ago. Not how they would let the narrative from their point of view is how to respond to a devastating pandemic. From our point of view, if you create the pandemic, is a procedure to lock people down, to undermine their individual liberties in a way, and have a propaganda format in place that you could start telling people, if you go outside, you're going to kill somebody. And then get all the liberal parrots to go and start acting like Karens or parroting that narrative that you better go back inside your house, or on a bright sunny day, somehow a pathogen that may or may not exist within you will float in the air through ultraviolet rays that kills viruses in 3 seconds, and float in the air and somehow get to your neighbor or someone standing right next, when it gets, someone right next to you. I fell into that too, just because I knew the seriousness of manipulating pathogens and if something escaped, how deadly it could be. But I was soon reassured that this wasn't a deadly disease and wearing a mask outside was ridiculous. But hey, I fell victim to it too. A top Ontario Court of Appeals has ruled that the provincial government was wrong to blockade peaceful outdoor protests during a stretch of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Court of Appeals for Ontario made the decision in... Hold on a second. In a case, the Court of Appeals for Ontario made the decision in a case involving the former Ontario Member of Parliament, Randy Hillier. Hillier had been charged for organizing and attending protests during a time when the province banned most outdoor gatherings. He appealed after the lower court said that while his right to peacefully assembly was violated, the government was allowed to do it under law. Yeah, what law? You can't. That's the great thing about the United States. You can't violate people's constitutional individual rights and liberties because you think it's dangerous. Well, then, they'll raise the danger flag every chance they get if they could use that to subvert your rights. And that was the whole point about the pandemic and the lockdowns in the first place. And then the story goes on to say, but a 3-judge panel at the appeals court disagreed. They said that the first judge used the wrong legal test to make the decision. The panel said the judge focused too broadly on the general impact of the rules instead of looking closely at how they affected peaceful protest rights. Zero hedge U.S. futures begin to surge following Treasury Secretary Bessent's comments. President has maximum negotiating leverage. Well, we like this because words affect markets just as much as, let's say, actions do. We got more news coming up. New York Times. Supreme Court temporarily blocks order requiring return of wrongly deported migrant. The Chief Justice, acting on his own, issued an administrative stay. A brief pause. We all know what a stay is by now. A brief pause meant to give the court time to reconsider the matter. The justices are expected to act in the coming days. And this follows a win reported by the Associated Press. Supreme Court allows Trump to deport Venezuelans under wartime law, but only after a judge's review, of course, so they hedge their bet. The Supreme Court on Monday allowed the Trump administration to use the 18th century wartime law to deport Venezuelan migrants, but said they must get a court hearing before they are taken from the United States. I don't know why. They're here fucking illegally. In a bitterly divided decision, the court said the administration must give Venezuelans who claim are gang members reasonable time to go to court. Why? They're here illegally. But the conservative majority said the legal challenges must take place in Texas instead of a Washington courtroom. They're here illegally is the point. I don't understand that. They're here illegally. Why do they need to go to court to be deported? Now, I could understand if they're going to an El Salvadoran prison like they are in this case, they need to be convicted of a crime or so forth and so on. But they still can be deported. You could take them to El Salvador and maybe not put them in a prison or take them somewhere else. The fact is affording of foreign nationals get the same legal protections in this country. I understand that. But I don't understand why people that are arrived here illegally, that there shouldn't be some swifter way to get them out of the country. And not because the system, the gears of justice turn slowly. So why does someone get to stay here for a year, 2 years, 3 years while he's going to court to see if he's going to be taken out of the country when he should just be taken out of the country? More news from Fox News. Enough is enough. House Republicans tout GOP effort to pass bill cracking down on rogue judges. GOP Representative Darrell Issa submitted a bill limiting the scope of rogue judges, is expected to move forward this week. You should look for the Democrats in the Senate to filibuster. Goes on to say it's unprecedented the amount of injunctions trying to stop the President Trump's America First agenda, which overwhelmingly the American people support. And to have one district judge to be able to determine the direction of our country is not what the judiciary is meant for. The No Rogue Rulings Act, introduced by Representative Darrell Issa of California, would limit district court judges' ability to issue orders blocking Trump's policies nationwide. In other words, nationwide injunctions and not just injunctions on how presidential decisions or federal decisions affect the constituencies in their district. Republicans are expected to advance the legislation out of the House Rules Committee and vote this week. Reuters is reporting Trump says U.S. Iran set for direct nuclear talks. Tehran says they will be indirect. Zero Hedge, there's no Russian collapse, neither military, industrial, nor economic, nor social. There is no terrible Russian threat within 3 to 4 years, and this is looking at the whole context of the Russian military influence, or influence in their sphere of influence, I should say. Even by some miracle, they don't have to keep a significant part of their army in Ukraine, because even if there's a ceasefire, the 90+% is not needed in Ukraine. They're talking about their military. They only have 10% of their military in Ukraine. And that's why they want to have a war of attrition to go past that 3 to 4 year mark. Like today, they still won't be able to withdraw a significant part of their forces from there either. The bigger the slice they cut out of Ukraine, the longer the demarcation line, the more soldiers they need to hold it. But there is no Russian collapse, neither military, industrial, nor economic, nor social. They can keep up this pace for years to come. That is, they are enough for Ukraine, but not for Europe. So even from Western analysis, and I'm sure the Russians have the same analysis, they can't go to war or have a long war with Europe. That's probably why the West wants to start one, to wear down Russia. But they have enough to beat Ukraine. My point is if NATO and the West would stop insisting that they can move into Russia's sphere of influence, meaning the Black Sea, Crimea, and Ukraine, because Crimea is the key to the Black Sea, and the Black Sea is the key to Russia's strategic interest. So if we weren't, or the West wasn't dead set on getting influence in that sphere, we wouldn't have a war to begin with. All right, let's move to Wisconsin. The Federalist is reporting analysis. Despite leftist wishes, Wisconsin congressional maps unlikely to change. That is indeed a good thing. In its memo, the Milwaukee-based conservative law firm argues that any effort to reconfigure the Badger State's congressional maps ahead of the next year's election faces significant practical and legal problems in both state and federal court and are ultimately unlikely to succeed. While those who value the Constitution have much to be concerned about in the court's bought and paid for leftist majority, a successful quest to redraw the current district lines shouldn't keep conservatives up at night. So in this gentleman's analysis, and what we were worried about will probably happen, but not in the short term. And according to this conservative, there are going to be significant legal challenges from the right to any redistricting attempt. But the redistricting isn't, the suits are brought by the Democrats and then are ruled on by the court. The court doesn't decide. More news from the post-millennial. American billionaire granted U.S. aid funds for Gaza project, allegedly funneled cash to Hamas for terrorist tunnels. Any assessment of the factors that enabled Hamas to carry out these unprecedented attacks is woefully incomplete without considering the terrorist tunnel network's central role and who funded it, which is this guy, Palestinian-American billionaire Bashar Masri, being accused of using the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, or the CIA, and international funded Gaza infrastructure projects to help Palestinian terrorists build their terror tunnel network. Indeed, they took reconstruction funds, and that's what Trump's worried about. Any funds given for reconstruction will build more tunnels. According to a lawsuit filed on Monday on behalf of American October 7th massacre victims by law firms, Masri allegedly rebuilt the Gaza industrial estate, a 480,000 square meter industrial park that had been established in 1997 with the support from USAID, turning it into a hub of Hamas operations. including for the terrorist tunnel network, which was used to cross under the border to attack Israelis. All right, let's get back to this decision in the Supreme Court that granted Trump to use this 19th century wartime act to deport Venezuelan gang members. All right, Perry asked me last night, who was the dissenter? Well, no surprise here. Newsweek is reporting Amy Coney Barrett siding against Trump sparks MAGA fury. A disgusting fraud. What's disgusting about it? Well, a dissent by Justice Amy Coney Barrett in a case concerning President Donald Trump's use of the wartime era deportation laws triggered a wave of backlash from prominent conservative commentators and online supporters of the president. Barrett, who was appointed to the Supreme Court by Trump in 2020, joined the court's 3 liberal justices in opposing the majority's decision to allow the administration to continue deporting alleged gang members under the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. Excuse me, it's 18th century law, not a 19th century law. In her dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor warned that Trump administration's conduct poses an extraordinary threat to the rule of law. Not really. Everybody that's here illegally, as I said previously, the federal government has the right to deport anybody who isn't a citizen in the United States. Those who have been granted legal protections obviously get court, but not visa holders, especially temporary visa holders, and not people who came here illegally. But in any case, getting back to Coney Barrett, what's a big surprise? When he nominated her, there were a bunch of us looking at her record and go, well, she's an establishment authoritarian, and so she's going to side with the establishment authoritarians, which in the most case these days is on the left. And she has, repeatedly. So we all knew that that was a bad pick, but that's why, do you understand that that's why the left didn't fight as hard against her nomination in the Supreme Court that they did, let's say, Gorsuch, not so much, but particularly Kavanaugh. More news from Just the News. House GOP leader seeks to pass Senate budget resolution amid Republican opposition. The budget resolution is critical to advancing Trump's legislative agenda on the southern border, on tax cuts, energy policy, as it allows Republicans to avoid Senate filibuster by the Democrats. Johnson, a Louisiana Republican, reportedly plans to vote on the Senate blueprint resolution as early as Wednesday. GOP leadership is looking to pass the budget resolution. But House Budget Committee Chairman Jody Arrington, which I previewed, you could check out his Face the Nation appearance on my YouTube channel, said over the weekend that he was concerned about the Senate budget's resolution. The Senate's response was unserious and disappointing, creating $5 trillion in new costs. Obviously, you can't be a conservative while raising spending. More from Just the News. Southern California saw 97 border-related arrests this week, including, this is the news, another 2 CPB agents, Border Patrol agents. What were they doing? I'll get to that in just a second. I want to get into this story and all right. So among the 97 arrests in 1 week were 2 San Ysidro DOE CPB agents, Ferris Almonte and Ricardo Rodriguez. They were charged with conspiracy to bring in aliens for financial gain, bringing in aliens for financial gain, and receipt of bribes by public official. Not good. Get them out. I'm sure they're going to be fired. I hope they're fired. All right, and next we have this article about Kristi Noem here. Again, from Just the News, Noem presents buyout offers to DHS employees ahead of workforce reduction. Like most of the time, there's cash incentive to retire early or quit, and deferred resignation with a brief period of paid administrative leave. The buyout options, she said, reflect a commitment to aligning our workforce with the evolving mission needs while supporting the personnel and professional goals of our dedicated employees. We got to reduce federal spending, and we have to, there's a lot we have to do, and Trump's on it. How it's all going to shake out is hard to say because it's being blocked by the Democrats. Everything. How could you reduce costs in the government when you have federal lower circuit judges putting stays and injunctions on everything you do? Have to reduce spending. And so that's why I don't know the Senate bill, they came out with more spending. That's a neocon agenda. There's nothing conservative about neoconservatism. They're just Democrats on the other side of the aisle. Excuse me, scratch that. They are just liberals on the other side of the aisle. One American News longtime Trump critic Bill Maher compliments him after a White House dinner, one of the most effective politicians. Trump is really one of the most effective politicians, whatever you think of the policy or him as a person. Bill Maher is almost 70. Wow. Just as a politician, just understanding that you should always lean into being more of who you are. You know, he has those moments that no other politician has, and the Democrats have to find that kind of guy. But let's be real, they've been searching for years, and they're still coming up short. And then he goes into that thing, the story about the Taliban. If you didn't know, Maher often regales that story. He likes that story about that Trump met with the Taliban leader and then showed him a satellite photo of the guy's house and said, you know, if you hurt one American soldier during this truce of sorts, I know where you live, and the first bomb will be coming for your house. Reuters is reporting Trump to sign executive orders to boost coal industry, sources say. Trump plans to sign orders directing the Interior and Energy departments to take actions to support coal industry, according to a source briefed on the details of the event. Both sources questioned anonymity because they were not over. Wow, Reuters and New York Times, everybody using sources that are anonymous. The actions will also include efforts to save coal plants at risk of retirement. When U.S. power demand is rising for the first time in 2 decades on growth as power-hungry users such as data centers or artificial intelligence, electric cars, and cryptocurrency. This is the problem. We keep raising our appetite for electricity and then eliminating the sources where we can get electricity. Stupid. Hey, you want to cut down on electricity use? I'm for that. Not rationing or anything like that, but if you're worried about your carbon footprint, use less electricity. Like as soon as I'm done here, I'm going outside. I put my phone in the desk drawer or somewhere. Like I'm online in the morning. By noon, I don't want to get back onto the computer. Or I don't want to start looking at my phone or whatever. All right, U.S. Admiral at NATO fired an expanding national security purge. U.S. Navy Vice Admiral Shoshana Chatfield, who holds a senior position in NATO, has been fired of what appears to be an expanding national security purge of top officials by the Trump administration. But a lot of this stuff wasn't confirmed by the Pentagon. This is what's happening. It's not just people whose history, in their history, they have spoken out against the President of the United States, which now that he's president again, can be seen as seditious. So the big worry is, obviously on the surface, is people that aren't, or not that they're going to be loyal to Trump, that they're going to be disloyal in a way that they will subvert or try to subvert what the president is doing. Like, what was his name? Peter Strzok. Like Peter Strzok, who was a government employee whose commander-in-chief was Donald Trump, was working deliberately to undermine the president's administration. You can't have people like that in your administration. In a larger sense, you have to get rid of all the people that are connected to the deep state liberal establishment that are like stay behind networks that not only will undermine the current administration, but that won't be good for future administrations moving forward, because you'll always have that liberal establishment trying to undermine or obstruct any kind of conservative agenda. Again, from Reuters, Musk's Doge using AI to snoop on federal workers. Trump administration officials have told some of the U.S. government employees that Elon Musk's Doge team of technologists is using artificial intelligence to surveil at least one federal agency's communications for hostility towards President Trump and his agenda, said two people, again, anonymous. While much of Musk's Department of Government Efficiency remains shrouded in secrecy, not really. They have a website, transparency, and then Elon Musk is always saying we're totally transparent. And in every fucking mainstream media article, it's shrouded in secrecy. It's not shrouded in secrecy. Obviously, you have to be careful about announcing things before you do them, because then you're going to lock yourself into obstruction. So, but once they're in there and once they're doing the work, supposedly letting everybody know. But the surveillance would mark an extraordinary use of technology to identify expressions of perceived disloyalty in a workforce already upended by widespread firings and severe cost cutting. Okay. First of all, if you work for a corporation, or as the way I look at it, if you work for the federal government, no real difference there. The place where you work for can surveil you. You're an employee in charge of that agency or the federal government, or if you're working for a corporation, the corporation. So when you're working, you could be surveilled. Now, are they surveilling social media? It doesn't really get into what they say. I mean, it doesn't really get into what they're talking about here. They say they're using AI, so they're probably using AI within intranet closed systems, how people communicate with each other, what have you. And their conjecture is to look for disloyalty against Trump. Or is it disloyalty? Is it not disloyal? It's disloyal or seditious against the president of the United States. They try to take Trump out of the fact that he's the executive of the United States. Okay, you're being disloyal to the president of the United States. It doesn't matter who it is. And so I don't think that's the real reason. I think the real reason is to dig out any Peter Strzoks who are in there who are truly seditious, consider themselves some sort of stay-behind network that's willing to obstruct and undermine the policy of the elected official. New York Post is reporting AOC flies first class to Bernie Sanders to fight oligarchy. Rally as critics pan lefty poll for battling inequality one mimosa at a time. If you look at yesterday's episode, before I got into the news, I pointed out how they are mounting, once again, the Bernie Sanders bait and switch operation, which they know most of the people on the left are progressives, are socialists. There's a large, Bernie gets a lot of people. And to their credit, they're right into this, in the certain idea that corporate fascism or corporate oligarchy, if you will, is an issue because of their unfair political influence. And that's why I don't believe in Citizens United, because corporations by law are persons, but I don't believe they're persons. All right, they did this in the 18th century. They created a lawful construct, merchant construct, a shell company that is a Frankenstein monster that can do all the things that you can't do, but gets all the individual rights that a person gets. I just don't. In any case, yesterday I delved into Bernie Sanders and his bait and switch is in 2016, he won the Democratic nomination, but Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the DNC took it away from him, and they did it legally. And then again in 2020, he garnered all the support as he ran for president and then just handed it off to Joe Biden, just like it did in 2016. So you're going to see a similar, if you're a Bernie bro, and I have some affinity for Bernie Sanders, but economically, socialism doesn't work. So it could be poor and fair if that's what you prefer. But Bernie Sanders is launching the bait and switch once again. He will garner all the support from the radicals on the left and the socialists and the communists and the disaffected and all these people. And then, right during nomination time, he's going to just give it all to the establishment character, whether it's Gavin Newsom or whomever. And you will be duped. All you Bernie bros and gals will be duped once again. But this time, there will be no filing of lawsuits because the people that leak information and file lawsuits end up dead. Maybe Clinton isn't running. Maybe the death count won't be as high. All right, more news from the post-millennial. Gen Z, loneliest generation as young adults deal with rejection, social anxiety. From education to careers to romance, never before have young adults had this much access to prospective yeses, but it turns into no's so frequently. And we could get into the article just a bit here. From education to careers to romance, they never had so much access to yeses, but they are told no so frequently. Gen Z is one of the loneliest and most anxious generations. Many of the young adults she spoke to, this is the author of the article, had been rejected from hundreds of jobs. A 22-year-old named Dylan shared his frustration with low acceptance rates from universities, even though he had a high-quality resume and they included good grades and participation in sports. You got to make it. However you make it, you got to make it. The sense of entitlement, and they said there's an expectation of agency in an increasingly mediated world, which means if you're going to go online like I'm doing here, I don't need to be successful. I'm not trying to be a star to make money from this or whatever. I'd like to, but I don't need to. I'm not, because if you're trying to do it on the internet, the competition, it's like you're trying to be an NBA star. You have to figure out what market you'll fit best in, what your aptitude is, what your skill sets are, and then direct it, hopefully, into something that interests you. But you'll have to, if you're going into a competitive career, you got to be prepared for that. If you want to do something else, you just got to be prepared. But the point is, if you talk to young people, they can't do anything. And I mean simple stuff. It's like their interests are I don't know. They're like, they have specific interests and then everything else doesn't matter. I don't want to get too much into that. I mean, young people have a hard enough time, and we're all going to have a hard enough time soon enough, because with AI and robotics, there aren't going to be any jobs. And they've been warning us about this for some time. So I'm sure their angst is real. Their anxiety is real. But it's a changing labor situation. Human labor is going to be less valued more than ever before, probably. And it's causing a great deal of distress and mental illness. We got to figure out what to do. I have no problem with deindustrialization, particularly away from the technology front. We should put humans first and foremost. And if you want to help humans, that's great. But if you want to displace humans in the workforce, that's bad. All right, more on Audrey Hale. The trans Nashville school shooter Audrey Hale ranted about wanting to kill all the white kids in newly revealed diary entries from the New York Post. And what we have to understand here is that she was mentally ill, extremely so. And it seems like after she went through that 8-week psychiatric program, she was even worse. So what does that lead you to believe? And then she goes and shoots people. But the fact that they wanted to label it that it's not a hate crime, it's a hate crime. As the transgender school shooter who murdered 6 people at a Nashville's convent school in 2023 raged about hating America and wanted to kill all the white kids. She repeated how she wants to kill her own race and destroy all the white people who are teachers. Being white sucks. Being black is so cool. Black people should rule. White people should fall. Every white person who lived and died, I hate you all. She goes on to say, fucking deranged. I mean, this is what I'm talking about. People are just, you need to worry the most about your mental state. And you can't do that subjectively. You can only do it objectively. You can't, in your objective head, you're like, I'm not insane. Yeah, you are. We all are to an extent. I hate the American people, she wrote. America is not the land of the free. Even though it's in the rule of law, constitutionally, that you have all these freedoms. It's a land full of idiots, she said. It'll only get worse for this country. Not near enough gods like me. America and its people are all destined to soon be betrayed. So she's blasphemous on top of it, which makes her of the devil, if you believe in such things. Crazy, insane Satanists. Like I said, you got to get your mental state right. The best way to do that is go for a walk in the woods or something. Get away from human influence, and you may have a revelation of truth. She went on to say that she had admiration for the Columbine school shooters, where this all started, the DC snipers. Oh my gosh. Serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer and Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh, referring to all of them, including herself, as gods. I feel I am the reincarnation of Dylan Klebold. My thoughts of depression are forever linked to his and my experience as well. So she was in depression, being treated for depression, obviously, with SSRIs. She chose the Covenant School as a target because she was afraid of being overpowered, because she's weak female during the attack. She was. Because she didn't know anything about tactics. She didn't think that the cops would be racing up to take her down. She was still looking out the window at the squad cars while the officers came in from behind. She didn't even she barely turned around. Hale also attended the school as a child and had some of her happiest memories of her life there. One of her most twisted motivations for targeting the school. You see this with mentally ill people all the time. Things that made them happy, they rail against, especially if they, because with all mental illness, there's a schism in your psyche, and that's how they do it. They drive a schism into your psyche, and then they take the compartmentalized parts and influence those parts, and then those parts could be triggered to take over. It's mind control. But to cause her, now that you're a new person, the old person you hate. And you see this a lot with transsexuals, especially if there was parts of that previous life that made you happy, you grow disgusted with that. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment, share the podcast. All right, tonight we'll probably have a Tuesdays with Perry. Episode 112, I think. We'll be talking about all the latest headlines and developments in the political world. So join me for that. Join me every day, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. or thereabouts around on Rumble. Maybe simulcast to YouTube. I keep toying with that, but we'll see. Check out my other website, libpop.org. Learn about libertarian populism. Check me out on social media, X, Facebook, Getter Minds, True Social. Stay hip to the trick. And I'll see you tonight. Hopefully, if not, I'll see you tomorrow. Respect.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
You can't handle the truth.